The icy wind cut through the air as 12-year-old Jaden walked through the snowy park. He heard a faint, almost imperceptible sound, a soft whimper. Freezing in place, he looked around and spotted a shepherd dog tied to a tree with a rope. Her fur was covered in frost, and her eyes looked at Jaden with such pain and hope that he couldn't walk away. But as he got closer, his heart stopped. Beneath the shepherd's paws was a tiny puppy, trembling from the cold. This moment marked the beginning of an incredible story that moved everyone who heard its details. Friends, do you think you could do what Jaden did? Let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories of kindness and courage. The air was biting cold, each breath Jaden took forming a visible puff of steam in the frigid winter morning. Snow blanketed the park, muffling every sound except the soft crunch beneath his boots as he made his way along the icy path. The trees, stripped bare of their leaves, stood like silent sentinels, their branches dusted with frost. Despite the beauty of the scene, the chill seemed to creep into everything, making the world feel harsh and uninviting. Jaden pulled his coat tighter around himself, his gloved hands stuffed deep into his pockets to shield them from the bitter cold. He was used to winter walks, even enjoyed them most days, but today felt different. The park was eerily quiet, the usual sounds of children playing or dogs barking replaced by an almost oppressive silence. It was as if the frost itself had frozen not just the landscape but the life within it. As he rounded a bend in the path, something stopped him in his tracks. A sound, so faint he almost thought he imagined it, floated through the crisp air. It was a soft whimper, barely audible over the wind that rustled the frost-covered branches. Jaden froze, straining his ears to catch the noise again. His heart began to race, not out of fear but from an inexplicable urgency. There it was again. A low, pitiful cry that seemed to come from somewhere off the path. He turned his head toward the sound, his breath hitching as he scanned the snowy expanse. The park looked empty, the white ground unbroken except for the faint outlines of his own footprints. But the sound persisted, tugging at something deep inside him. It was a cry for help, of that he was certain. Jaden hesitated for only a moment before stepping off the path, his boots sinking into the snow with each step. The cold bit at his cheeks and ears, but he pressed on, driven by the need to find the source of the heartbreaking sound. The trees loomed closer as he trudged toward them, the shadows between their trunks deepening with each step. The whimper grew slightly louder, guiding him like a fragile thread in the otherwise silent wilderness. Then he saw it, a shape against the snow, partially obscured by the bare branches of a bush. Jaden's heart skipped a beat as he approached cautiously, unsure of what he was about to find. At first, it looked like nothing more than a mound of snow, but as he got closer, the shape became clearer. As Jaden stepped closer, the scene before him became painfully clear. The shepherd dog was tied tightly to the base of the tree, a rough and weathered rope biting into the fur around her neck. Her coat, which might once have been sleek and glossy, was now stiff with frost, each hair tipped with tiny crystals of ice. Her body quivered visibly, each shiver betraying the depth of the cold that had seeped into her bones. The icy wind tousled her fur, but she made no attempt to move, as if she had long since given up the fight to free herself. Her eyes met Jaden's, and he froze. Those eyes held a depth of emotion he couldn't have imagined: pain, exhaustion, and something else he couldn't quite place. It wasn't fear, but rather a quiet, desperate hope, as if she understood that this boy standing before her might be her last chance. They stared at one another for what felt like an eternity, the connection so profound that it made the rest of the world fade away. Jaden's heart ached as he took in the details. Her ribs pressed visibly against her sides, evidence of days, maybe weeks, without proper food. The snow around her was lightly trampled, the only sign that she had tried, at some point, to pull free from her tether. But now she lay still, too weak or too resigned to struggle anymore. The rope around her neck was tied in a crude knot, digging into her skin where she must have strained against it. It was a sight that both horrified and galvanized Jaden. He knew he couldn't leave her there. For a moment, he hesitated. The stories he'd heard about stray or abandoned dogs played in his mind. What if she was aggressive? What if she didn't trust him? The cold logic of fear and doubt whispered that he should back away, call for help, and wait. But then her eyes met his again, and the soft whimper that escaped her lips silenced all those thoughts. She wasn't a threat, she was pleading. pleading for someone to care enough to act. Jaden knelt in the snow, moving slowly to avoid startling her. His knees sank into the icy ground, the cold biting through his clothes, but he didn't notice. He extended a hand cautiously, his breath fogging in the air as he whispered softly, "Hey, girl. It's okay. I'm not here to hurt you." She flinched slightly at the sound of his voice but didn't pull away. If anything, her trembling grew less intense, as though she could sense that he wasn't there to harm her. The closer Jaden got, the more he noticed the signs of her suffering. Her paws, partially buried in the snow, were red and raw from exposure. Her ears twitched weakly at his voice, but they barely held the energy to perk up fully. Yet despite her condition, she didn't growl or bark. She simply watched him, her gaze never leaving his face, as if weighing whether or not to trust this boy who had suddenly appeared in her frozen, desolate world. Jaden reached the base of the tree and studied the rope. The knot was tight, the fibers stiff with frost, and it would take more than his bare hands to undo it. He glanced around, searching for anything he could use, but the barren landscape offered no tools. As Jaden knelt beside the shepherd dog, his attention was drawn to a slight movement beneath her trembling frame. At first, he thought it might have been a trick of the swirling snow, but then he noticed it again, a faint, almost imperceptible shift near her chest. Narrowing his eyes, he leaned closer, his breath fogging in the cold air. What he saw next made his heart skip a beat. Nestled beneath the shepherd's paws was a tiny puppy, no larger than the size of his hand. Its black fur was speckled with frost, blending into the shadows of its mother's protective body. The puppy was curled tightly into a ball, its small chest rising and falling in shallow, uneven breaths. It trembled violently, every shiver a testament to the icy grip of the winter air that seemed to press down on them both. Jaden's first instinct was disbelief. How could something so fragile, so vulnerable, have survived out here in these brutal conditions? The puppy looked impossibly small, a mere whisper of life against the vast, white expanse of the snow-covered park. Its eyes were closed, and its tiny nose twitched as it struggled to draw in even the faintest breath. It looked as though it had given all it had to hold on to life, relying entirely on the meager warmth provided by its mother. The shepherd dog shifted slightly, breaking Jaden's trance. Her movement was slow and deliberate, her body curling further around the puppy as though to shield it from Jaden's touch. Her tired, pain-filled eyes met his once again, but this time there was a new emotion in them, an unspoken plea. She wasn't just asking for help for herself, she was begging for the life of her pup. That realization struck Jaden harder than the icy wind against his cheeks. This dog had been fighting not just to survive but to protect her baby, sacrificing every ounce of her strength to give the tiny creature even the faintest chance. Jaden's throat tightened, and his hands hovered uncertainly over the pair. He could see the way the shepherd's paws rested gently over the puppy, not crushing or pinning it, but cradling it with the kind of care only a mother could offer. The frost clinging to her fur glittered in the weak sunlight, but her body heat, what little remained, had kept the pup alive against impossible odds. The puppy let out a faint whimper, barely audible against the howling wind. The sound was so small, so fragile, that it felt like it could be snatched away by the cold at any moment. Jaden's resolve hardened. There was no room for hesitation. This was a life hanging by the thinnest of threads, and he knew he had to act quickly. "It's okay," he whispered, his voice low and soothing. "I'm going to help you. Both of you." But Jaden's work wasn't done. His attention shifted to the tiny bundle of life nestled against the shepherd's chest. The puppy, wrapped in his scarf, let out a weak whimper, its body trembling against the biting cold. Jaden carefully scooped it into his arms, holding it close to his chest to share his body heat. The small creature felt impossibly light, its fragile frame barely registering in his arms. Its shallow breaths puffed weakly against the fabric of the scarf, a reminder of just how critical every moment was. The shepherd shifted slightly, her nose brushing against Jaden's arm as if to ensure her puppy was still safe. He looked into her eyes again and gave her a reassuring nod. "I've got him," he said softly. "But now we need to move. Come on." He stood, cradling the puppy against his chest with one arm and gently guiding the shepherd with the other. Her legs were stiff, and she stumbled slightly as she tried to follow him, her body weakened from the cold and lack of nourishment. Jaden slowed his pace, speaking softly to her as they began their trek back toward the path. The snow crunched loudly under their feet, the sound magnified in the eerie stillness of the park. Each step felt like a battle against the elements. The wind howled around them, cutting through Jaden's coat and making his face sting with cold. The puppy let out another faint cry, and he instinctively tightened his hold, shielding it further from the icy air. The shepherd trudged behind him, her movements slow but determined. Despite her exhaustion, she kept her head low, her focus entirely on staying close to her pup and the boy who had given them a chance. Jaden's legs burned with effort as he pushed through the deep snow, but he refused to stop. He glanced back at the shepherd often, offering quiet words of encouragement that seemed to keep her moving. "We're almost there," he said, though the path ahead still stretched far. "You're doing great, girl. Just a little further." The weight of the situation pressed heavily on him. He was just a kid, alone in the freezing cold with 2 lives depending on him. But the fear and doubt that lingered at the edges of his mind were drowned out by a single, unshakable thought: he couldn't fail them. Not now. As they neared the edge of the park, the distant glow of streetlights came into view, their warm light piercing through the darkness. Jaden's heart leapt with relief. He was close to safety, close to giving the shepherd and her puppy the warmth and care they so desperately needed. He quickened his pace, glancing back to ensure the shepherd was still with him. She was, her eyes fixed on the tiny bundle in his arms, as though willing her strength into her fragile pup. With every step, Jaden's determination grew. He wasn't just walking toward safety, he was walking toward hope for the shepherd, hope for her puppy, and hope that this moment of bravery could make all the difference. The streets beyond the park were eerily quiet, the houses blanketed in snow and their windows glowing warmly against the cold night. Jaden's heart ached at the contrast, the warmth and comfort so close, while the creatures in his care had been left to face the harshness of the elements alone. "Not anymore," he muttered to himself, his breath forming a cloud in the icy air. "They're going to be okay now." Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Jaden reached the small gate that led to his backyard. His hands fumbled with the latch, his fingers stiff and uncooperative, but he managed to push it open. The shepherd dog followed closely, her steps faltering but determined as she limped through the gate and into the relative shelter of the yard. Jaden wasted no time. He gently set the puppy down on a blanket he'd placed on the porch, wrapping it tightly before turning to the shepherd. She stood nearby, her legs trembling and her body visibly weak, but her eyes remained fixed on her baby. Jaden knelt beside her, placing a hand on her head and speaking softly. "You're safe now. Both of you." He led the shepherd into the warmth of the house, where the heat immediately began to thaw the frost clinging to her fur. She hesitated at first, her movements cautious as she stepped onto the rug, but the sight of her puppy nestled in the blanket seemed to reassure her. She lay down beside it, curling her body protectively around the tiny creature as Jaden fetched food and water. As the warmth of the house began to take hold, Jaden finally allowed himself to sit down, his legs aching from the effort of the journey. He watched as the shepherd licked her puppy gently, her eyes heavy with exhaustion but filled with relief. The puppy stirred slightly, letting out a soft whimper before nestling deeper into its mother's fur. Jaden leaned back against the wall, a wave of exhaustion washing over him. The journey had been harder than anything he'd ever done, but seeing the shepherd and her puppy safe and together made every step worth it. They were alive, and they were warm. That was all that mattered. The warmth of the house enveloped Jaden as he stepped inside, the door clicking shut behind him and cutting off the biting chill of the night. He set the puppy down gently on a soft, folded blanket he'd placed on the floor, its tiny body still wrapped in the scarf that had shielded it from the cold. The shepherd dog followed cautiously, her paws hesitant on the unfamiliar surface of the hardwood floor. Her eyes darted around the room, alert and watchful, but her exhaustion was evident in every movement. "Easy, girl," Jaden said softly, crouching down to meet her gaze. His voice was calm and soothing, meant to reassure her that she was safe now. "This is your home tonight. No more cold, no more snow." She blinked at him, her trembling frame relaxing just slightly as if she wanted to believe him but wasn't quite sure how. Jaden moved quickly but gently, mindful of the fragile state of his guests. He grabbed an old quilt from a closet and laid it beside the puppy, patting it softly to encourage the shepherd to settle there. At first, she hesitated, her instincts keeping her guard up. But then her eyes flicked to her puppy, who let out a faint whimper from within the folds of the scarf, and she stepped forward, her resolve giving way to maternal concern. She curled up on the quilt, her body forming a protective crescent around the puppy. Her nose nudged the tiny bundle, and Jaden watched as her tongue flicked out in gentle licks, cleaning the frost from the puppy's fur. It was a small, instinctive gesture, but it spoke volumes about the depth of her care and the lengths she had gone to keep her baby alive. Jaden busied himself in the kitchen, his movements quick but purposeful. He warmed a small bowl of milk, not too hot, and added a bit of softened bread to create a mushy mixture for the puppy. For the shepherd, he poured fresh water into a bowl and scooped out some leftover chicken he'd found in the fridge. It wasn't much, but it was all he had, and he hoped it would be enough for now. Returning to the living room, he set the food and water down carefully near the quilt. The shepherd's ears twitched at the sound, and she lifted her head slightly, her nose twitching as she caught the scent of the food. Jaden knelt a few feet away, not wanting to crowd her. "It's for you," he said softly, gesturing toward the bowls. "You've earned it." At first, she didn't move, her eyes flicking between the food and Jaden as though she were weighing her options. Then, slowly, she leaned forward and lapped at the water, her movements tentative at first but growing steadier as the cool liquid eased her thirst. She turned to the chicken next, taking small bites and chewing carefully, her body visibly relaxing with each mouthful. It was the first time Jaden saw a glimmer of trust in her tired eyes. The puppy stirred as the shepherd ate, letting out a soft, high-pitched squeak. Jaden reached out, his hands still warm from the bowl of milk he held. "Let's get you fed too," he murmured, carefully lifting the tiny creature and bringing it closer to the bowl. He dipped a finger into the milk and touched it gently to the puppy's mouth. At first, the pup didn't respond, its small body too weak. But after a moment, its nose twitched, and its tongue flicked out to taste the milk. Encouraged, Jaden repeated the motion, each small sip a victory. Gradually, the puppy's movements became more deliberate, its tiny body leaning into Jaden's hand for support as it lapped at the milk directly from the bowl. Its trembling began to subside, replaced by a subtle warmth as the nourishment took hold. Jaden felt a wave of relief wash over him. The faint spark of life he had seen in the snow was growing stronger, and for the first time that night, he allowed himself to hope. As the hours passed, the atmosphere in the room shifted. The once tense shepherd now rested her head on the quilt, her body curled protectively around her pup, whose tiny chest rose and fell in steady breaths. Jaden sat nearby, his back against the couch, watching them in silence. He couldn't help but marvel at the resilience of the dog, at the lengths she had gone to protect her baby even in the face of impossible odds. Her eyes, once filled with fear, now held a quiet gratitude as she glanced at Jaden. It wasn't just relief, it was trust. The warmth of the house, the food, and the quiet safety of the room worked their magic. The shepherd drifted into a light sleep, her ears twitching occasionally as she listened for any signs of danger. The puppy, tucked close against her, let out a tiny sigh, its body finally relaxed and at peace. Jaden stayed up long into the night, unwilling to leave their side. The journey they had endured together played over and over in his mind, the cold, the snow, the sheer will it had taken to get them here. He knew this wasn't the end of their story, but for now, they were safe. And that was enough. As he finally leaned back and closed his eyes, he couldn't help but feel a sense of pride, not just in what he had done, but in the incredible bond that had formed between him, the shepherd, and her tiny pup. In this small, warm room, on this cold winter night, they had found something precious, hope. Jaden's story began as an act of instinct and courage on a frigid winter night, but it didn't take long for it to ripple outward, touching the hearts of everyone who heard it. News of his rescue spread quickly through the community. At first, it was just neighbors who shared the tale, how a boy braved the cold and risked his safety to save a shepherd dog and her puppy. Then, local papers picked up the story, and soon, it became the topic of conversations in classrooms, cafes, and homes. People were captivated not only by the dramatic rescue but by the sheer selflessness of Jaden's actions. He hadn't stopped to think about the risks to himself or waited for someone else to step in. Instead, he had acted out of a deep sense of compassion, driven by the knowledge that if he didn't help, no one would. His bravery struck a chord, reminding everyone of the power of individual actions to make a difference. The shepherd dog and her puppy quickly became symbols of resilience and hope. Photos of the pair, now warm and thriving under Jaden's care, spread online, drawing messages of support from far beyond the neighborhood. Comments flooded in from people who were moved to tears by the story. "This boy is a true hero," one person wrote. Another added, "This reminds me that even small acts of kindness can save lives." Jaden, however, was modest about the attention. When asked why he had done it, he simply shrugged and said, "I couldn't just leave them there. They needed someone." His humility only made the story more inspiring. He hadn't acted for recognition, he had acted because it was the right thing to do. The story also spurred action. Animal shelters saw an increase in volunteers and donations as people were reminded of the many animals in need. Local schools began discussing Jaden's story as part of lessons on compassion and community. His actions became a catalyst for change, inspiring others to think about how they could make a difference in their own ways. As for Jaden, his life was forever changed by the bond he had formed with the shepherd dog and her puppy. He named the dog Hope and the puppy Spark, symbols of the light they had brought into his life. The once frightened shepherd now wagged her tail happily whenever Jaden came near, her gratitude evident in every affectionate nuzzle. Spark, too, was thriving, his playful energy a testament to the warmth and love that had saved him. The sight of Jaden walking through the park with Hope trotting beside him and Spark bounding ahead became a familiar and heartwarming image in the neighborhood. People would stop to say hello, often sharing how much the story had meant to them. Some brought treats for the dogs, others simply wanted to thank Jaden for reminding them of the good that still existed in the world. This story was more than just a tale of rescue, it was a lesson in kindness and courage. It showed that even in the harshest circumstances, there is always room for compassion. Jaden's actions proved that bravery isn't about grand gestures, it's about stepping up when others won't, about choosing to care when it's easier to look away. If this story moved you as much as it moved us, let us know in the comments where you're watching from and what this tale means to you. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more stories that celebrate the power of kindness and the incredible connections between humans and animals. Together, let's continue to share and inspire compassion in the world.